Tommy.
Hello, Patricia.
Good to see you. I like the navy shirt.
I know. Those who might be watching on YouTube, you can actually see that we're color coordinated today. If you're listening, you can't tell that.
Our wardrobe and costume coordinator set it up, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
We should enlist Wheezy to do that job at some point.
I always need help.
All right. Well, I'll send some ideas to Wheezy, some wardrobe ideas.
Okay.
All right. Well, good to be here. It's a good day when we get to podcast today. I know it's always going to be fun. So today we're talking about a great topic that pretty much sure everyone might be interested in listening to. And so let's dive in and get started.
Great.
Tommy, how are you going to tell us today how to be happy?
Yeah, it's a kind of a daunting topic, but it's kind of fun because it's one of those topics, how to be happy, that everybody asks in a sense. And sometimes people are apologetic for asking it, like, well, that's so self-centered to ask the question about how to be happy. But it's something we all want to know. Mm-hmm. And it's something that probably the huge majority of us struggle with. And they're not really clear answers. So I've thought a lot about this, not only recently, but even in really difficult seasons of intense suffering. How do you be happy in the midst of it? So I've got a lot of things that I'm really excited about sharing that I hope will be helpful to people.
Well, it's a uniquely human question. I'm not sure animals in whatever capacity, I mean, we know that there are brilliant animals out there who have great intellectual capacities and capacities for language, but do any other species besides humans ask the question, how to be happy? I think it's more likely that other species ask, how do I survive? So anytime there's something that's uniquely human, there's something worth paying attention to. And I like how you say there's no shame in asking that question. And it's worth exploring and pursuing. So let's get started. What are your thoughts about the whole idea of happiness, and what are people doing right now to try to be happy?
Yeah, and this is a bit anecdotal in terms of my sense of how I've seen people answer this question. Mm-hmm. And I think people are working really hard to figure this out. But these are some of the answers, obviously not exhaustive in terms of it, that I've heard in terms of the way people answer this. I see a lot of people that answer the question, how to be happy, and they equate happiness with comfort. If I'm comfortable, I just need to be comfortable. Life needs to be easy. It needs to be unstressful. If I have a stress-free life, I'm going to be happy. And so they therefore then do everything that they can to mitigate and minimize stress in their life, because that's going to be their path to happiness. So that's like one clear answer that I hear. I see a lot of people who work with incredible intensity and passion and drivenness to achieve a lot, whether it's achieving for a sense of purpose, whether it's achieving for accomplishment, but they look at their work as what's going to bring them happiness. And so they simply go harder and harder and harder, figuring the harder I go and the more I accomplish, the happier I'll be. So I see that as like one big bucket. A third bucket that I see particularly present today, and I've even heard a lot of podcasts recently about this, is that happiness is to be found in experiences.
Yeah.
So
I'm all in on that one.
Well, and the thing is about all of these, there is real truth in every single one of them.
Sure.
It's not like any of them are lies or there's nothing to be had in this. There's something true in all of them, and we'll get to that. But I find that a lot of people, particularly these days, are saying, happiness is to be found in the breadth and vitality of experiences. So, we do our stuff all day long just to get to the places where we can have an experience, which is where we find happiness. And so I see that as a big bucket. And then I'd say maybe kind of a last bucket, as I think that people look to find happiness in relationships. It's certain relationships, whether it's with their family or with a significant other or spouse or just their community. They think that's the place for happiness.
I like your 4 categories. And as you're talking about it, it makes me think of the question, to what extent is there a difference between happiness, like comfort, achievement, experiences, and relationships bringing us happiness? Or do comfort, achievement, experiences, and relationships help deal with pain and suffering? Like it help you just feel better. So let me back up a little bit. If I'm having a day and I wake up and I'm in a rut and I'm feeling badly and I just want to feel better, I'm not even asking the question, how do I be happy? I just want to feel better. I don't know why I feel badly. I don't know if I'm anxious. I don't know if I'm depressed. I don't know if there's certain circumstances that are making me feel badly. But the question for my day is, how do I feel better? And at some point in my life, I developed what you could call pain relief pathways, or you could call them happiness pathways.
Coping mechanisms?
Yeah, they're techniques that I have found that have reliably helped me deal and cope with pain. And we tend to have a pathway that is well formed and well trod in our lives, and it tends to be in one of these 4 categories. I'm sure that there are more.
Depending on the person.
Yeah, depending on the person. And what I think is fascinating, though, is that well-worn pathway, which has served us well as a way of alleviating pain, existential, internal, circumstantial pain, can end up being the very thing that's preventing us from happiness over time.
Yeah, I'd say also on the other side, though, that mechanism that is our go-to that we might have often reflects an inherent imbalance in us that we recognize that something's missing, and therefore I am down, I'm depressed, and I need this to help create something that's out of balance. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that's why we tend to have go-tos. Other than, I think also sometimes people can use these as a form of anesthetic.
Sure.
To just take away the pain. I need to get away from the pain, so I'm going to do X, I'm going to go out and have this experience just to get my mind off of things. So one of the things I think we'll talk about I'd like to perhaps reframe this idea of happiness is that there's always an issue of balance that we have to deal with. So
I like that nuance. So it's not so much that these pathways to alleviate pain or to find happiness that are well worn in our lives are bad. They've served us well. It's maybe that they've gotten out of balance.
Absolutely, because if we take any one of those and that becomes our one thing, that becomes our consuming thing, any one of those in isolation is bound to create some imbalance, and again, I think we'll get further into that, but some of these have an imbalance that are towards self-centeredness that is all about me, and some of them have an imbalance towards other-centeredness that excludes me. But in isolation, I think each one of them can take us down a path, if it's held up on a pedestal, to imbalance that is going to leave us short in our seeking for happiness, because happiness requires a certain balance.
So what I hear you saying is that in the pursuit of happiness, we tend to pursue a pathway that can, if we keep on it and we overemphasize it and over pursue it, it's not necessarily bad in and of itself, but it leads to an imbalance, which itself undermines happiness.
Absolutely. I take a very simple example. The person who is living a life of purpose, if they take that to an extreme, they simply become a workaholic. Mm-hmm. And that workaholic creates a drivenness and an unhappiness in their life. There's nothing wrong with their pursuit of living a life of meaning and purpose. Mm-hmm. But in isolation, it will take them to unhappiness. Same thing for someone whose life is completely focused on relationships. Taken to an extreme, it's going to leave them short. They're going to find that their happiness is contingent on other people and how other people are responding, and it's going to leave them short. So any one of these, they're all good. They're all important to a full life. Mm-hmm. But in out of balance, they're going to lead us down a wrong path. So we have to find that balance, which is why I'd like to kind of reframe this a little bit.
So how would one reframe and rebalance themselves if they're pursuing a path of happiness that just doesn't seem to be working, or it just leads to, you're trying to feel better and it's not working?
Yeah. So what I would like to kind of put out as my hypothesis, my theory for, what I've found is so important for me is that happiness is found in receiving and giving, and the balance between those two. That it's as we receive the things that we need in life, we receive love, we receive space, we receive learning, and then as we give, as we serve others, as we love others, as we share with others, it's in that balance that we find this incredible sense of joy and happiness. And where it doesn't work for someone is if they take those two elements of receiving and giving and have a hyper focus on one versus the other. They're living their life to just give, sacrifice, and they end up spent and embittered. Or it's all about receiving. It's all about, I just need more self-care for myself. And they think, because the self-care feels good to them, just like giving feels good and serving other people, but if taken to an extreme, it becomes self-centered and terribly unsatisfying as a way to happiness. But if we can get into a rhythm of life of receiving from God, receiving from others, receiving in quietness, and then we give out of that strength, we find this constant sense of joy and contentment and satisfaction and purpose and intimacy as we do those things. And so I find that all of those other four categories find their best when we can have a rhythm of receiving and giving. And I purposely put receiving first because I deeply believe we can't give that which we haven't first received.
The second commandment of Jesus's, it's a pivotal statement that regardless of whether you adhere to the Christian faith or not, I think is a great principle for just life, for helping the world go around. And it's, you should love your neighbor as yourself. And that statement has a balancing in it. Like, you can only love your neighbor as well as you're able to love yourself, or as you would say, receive love.
Yeah.
And if you're overemphasizing loving other people and not taking the time to know and receive your own love, that you won't love them very well, and you'll get off balance and bittered. And same, it can go the other way. Like, if you don't love your neighbor at all and only think about yourself, it won't work very well, and you won't be loving yourself very well. They go together. There's a It's almost like walking. It's trying to walk with one foot. Like we need both feet to walk. We need both
Absolutely.
giving and receiving.
Well, and we can keep going down that path because, certainly a little bit later in the New Testament, it says, we love because God first loved us. And if we don't know how to receive love, we can't give it. And we all know people that, if we were to be honest, would say that person is incapable of loving. And that what we're meaning by that is they've never received love. They've never been loved, so they have no clue how to love someone. They haven't received. And so that's where the receiving and the receiving first is so absolutely critical to the equation. And it carries forth from in every area. So, I love, like my mission in life is to be a teacher. It's what I love. But what I learned when I kind of framed that is that what underlies that, what precedes that, is I have to be a learner and a listener. I have to receive. If I don't receive, I have nothing to give. And that's true for all of us. But on the converse to that, if I just kept on receiving and receiving and receiving and never gave, I would be unsatisfied. That's one of the reasons we're redoing this podcast, because I had this year of Jubilee and it was all this receiving, and I felt like I was about to burst because I needed a place to give.
Yeah.
And this podcast is an example of something that brings me incredible joy and happiness because it's this receiving and giving.
Yeah, it was like you were backlogged on the receiving and didn't have an outlet.
Yes.
And you needed that. And so that was throwing your balance off.
Yeah. And another personal antidote, when Weezy and I went through the really difficult years of Perrin's cancer, and we were just pulled down day after day after day. It's really interesting. Both of us separately came to the same conclusion that we shared with one another and became kind of our go-to mantra. And that was, every day we need to do something for someone else. And there was nothing altruistic about this. This was survival, because we knew that we were completely consumed with our own stuff and with the suffering, and that the only path for us out of it is we had to get outside of ourselves. And that the only place we could, not the only place, but the central place we could find joy was by doing something for someone else, because we were so self-absorbed in our own suffering. Just another example, it's just we need desperately that balancing of receiving and giving. And I've come to think that that can be a framework for every area of life, of experiences and relationships and purpose, that they're all in each one of those subcategories about finding this beautiful balancing rhythm of receiving and giving. And that if we can find that, if we can begin to see our worlds and our days from that perspective, it will lead us and draw us to a place of true greater happiness.
Well, and I'm a little bit in the other side of things. Like you and Weezy chose every day to do something for other people as a way of rebalancing the focus that you were having to spend inwardly and your family. And, I've been doing some deep studying in the Enneagram, which, whether or not you are familiar with it or interested in it, there's a concept that I learned that I think applies. And that is this concept of that we as human beings, and really animals also, have these three instincts for survival. And if you think about animals in the wild, they need these three instincts of self-preservation, sexual to survive, and then herd or social mentality, belonging to a group. And the concept is that every human being is dominant in one of those, and then they have one that they're sort of in the middle on, and then they have one that they're repressed.
Right.
And the pathway to health, as it ties into this podcast, The Pathway to Happiness, is to try and rebalance those. So for me, I am dominant in the social. So I spend an inordinate amount of my energy focused on shoring up my family, making sure everyone in my family's okay, my friend group. And when I'm feeling bad or I just want to feel better, my worn pathway is to go and connect with other people, do things for other people, and not at all pay attention to myself.
Right.
Because where I'm repressed is the self-preservation instinct. And so what I have learned is that in order for me to rebalance, I need to exercise the muscle of what is a way that I could do something for myself today.
Receive. Right.
And it's so counterintuitive. And I think for people who are repressed in self-preservation, it feels selfish and it feels wrong. But for me, rebalancing is honoring that is a part of, I am a part of God's creation. I matter to the group, all of that. So, and that can go off balance as well.
Right.
But I think a part of this happiness pathway that you're talking about and framing it as a balancing of receiving and giving is assessing yourself. Where are you repressed and where are you dominant? And trying to bring more of a homeostasis or equilibrium to those instincts.
Yeah, and I would add to that assessing needs to happen without judgment.
Well, all of them are important.
Yeah, they all are important. And if you're, someone who is wired, as you say, towards the giving, you feel guilty to do something for yourself. And you might feel the opposite side of balance. So we want to be able to look at our lives without judgment and understand where are we in this balance between giving and receiving. And I would say that's, for me, it's what I would hope would be a takeaway from this episode. And we're going to have some future episodes that are going to go into other aspects of it. So I want to do even a further deep dive into this in some of these other episodes. But I think the takeaway to me is for each person to take a look at themselves as objectively as they can and say, where am I out of balance? Let's begin with the assumption that we all are out of balance to some degree or another. Which is the side that I'm out of balance, and what's one thing that I might do to try to bring myself more in balance? Whether it's in balance if I need to receive more, I need to care for myself, receive in whatever form, or learn to receive love from others instead of always giving, or on the opposite, I need to get outside of myself. I need to start doing something for someone else because I've become self-preserving, absorbed,
like comfort, self-comfort oriented.
Yes.
Yeah, and assessing yourself is great. And a great time to do that is when you're feeling bad. If you wake up in the morning and you're feeling bad, and to notice the pathway that you tend to take. Oh, I need to call a friend. Oh, I need to be concerned about my family. Oh, I need to do things for other people. To notice that.
Great.
No judgment, no condemnation, but just think, hey, can I switch gears a little bit here and maybe think, how could I do one thing for myself today that would feel really good? Or if you are prone to, no judgment here, but if you are prone to take good care of yourself, and when you're having a bad day, instead of thinking, oh, what do I need for myself today? What comfort do I need? How can I take care of myself? Maybe think, what is one thing I can do today that serves or gives to another person?
Yeah. Who's someone I need to reach out to? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, who could I put a call into that does nothing for me? It doesn't help me at all. It's just other focused.
Yeah.
And it's just helpful to know that one step will feel completely unnatural and hard to do. But little by little, we learn to strengthen that muscle and rebalance in our life.
Absolutely. So I hope everybody listening will spend a moment thinking particularly about this balance between giving and receiving, and this reframing of what will bring us happiness and satisfaction and joy. and reframe that in their own lives and just give it some thought and how it applies to you. And in our future episodes, we're going to tell some stories around this and do a little bit deeper dive in this. So thanks for listening.